If you like what I do, consider supporting me on Ko-fi or Patreon. Links in the description. This is the third and final video of our Thompson Brothers Triple Feature. By now, you know who the Thompson Brothers are, how much I adore them, and why they're so great. If you don't know, go check out my Sheepo and Eyelet videos. It's cool. I'll wait. Suckers, I ain't waiting for shit. Let's talk about Crypt Custodian. As you can imagine, being that I'm such a huge fan of Kyle's, I've had my eye on Crypt Custodian for a while. When I saw the main character was a cat, my brain went... But when I saw the game was a top-down MV, my brain went, oh no, oh no. Don't get me wrong, I'm not some pedantic purist who thinks MVs can only be 2D side-scrollers, though I very much prefer that they are. It's just, platforming and overhead perspective haven't been particularly kind to me in the past. I'm a huge fan of Unsighted, another top-down MV, and I can tell you the platforming in that game wasn't my favorite. So I was a little skeptical diving into Crypt Custodian. But then, my supporters voted Crypt Custodian as the MV I used their donations on. And so, what my supporters want, my supporters get. And what my supporters want is to know what Crypt Custodian is all about. You play as Pluto, a newly dead feline custodian condemned to clean up the Afterlife's garbage. But is this game garbage, or does this playful adventure sweep you off your feet? That was bad. Let's just get started.
Combat.
Combat's the focus in Crypt Custodian, and it does it very well. Much like Kyle's other works, things are kept simple. You smack jerks with your broom, dodge jerks trying to smack you, and when you fill up your urn by smacking jerks, you can then smack jerks with powerful special attacks. That's really all there is to it. Pluto doesn't have any combos. You just spam the attack button and he'll smack jerks at a pace close to how fast you're pressing the button. It's oddly satisfying. Keeping with the simplistic motif, you can only equip one special ability at a time that can only be swapped at save cauldrons or whatever they are. So you can mix things up if you're not feeling your current ability. Having uncomplicated combat is one of the game's absolute strengths, mainly because enemies will fill the screen with an absurd amount of bullshit, like you're playing a bullet hell. And maneuvering around that bullshit is really where most of the fun in Crypt Custodian is found. So, keeping the combat button-mashy and relatively brainless allows your cognitive energies to be used almost exclusively for evasion. And, I gotta say, I loved it. Most enemy encounters are going to be avoidable obstacles during exploration, but the game does like to lock you in battle arenas every so often. And I found these to be a great way to mix things up. Confinement in a quote-unquote bullet hell adds a lot of pressure to an otherwise chill gaming experience, and fluctuations in tone and player mood keeps the game fresh. Not to mention that some of these battle arenas could be pretty challenging, especially the no-hit arenas. Those will put some hair on your chest. Not really. The no-hit arenas are fun and challenging, but failing isn't punitive. If you fail, the game actually heals the hit you took and allows you to immediately jump back into the challenge. At least it did on normal. I didn't play the game on hard. This is a Kyle Thompson game. I'm here to vibe, chill, and have fun. I found the bosses to be challenging too, at least the earlier ones. There are 13 bosses in this game, and the first 3 had me on the ropes, probably because I was 1, still getting into the groove of things, and 2, had poor upgrades at the time, but more on those in the progression section. Once I started getting upgrade points and better upgrades, the bosses were pretty manageable. Some may have taken me down once, but I one-shotted a bulk of them. That's not to say they're too easy or bad. I thought every boss was engaging and fun to fight. There's definitely a challenge to be had with each and every one of them. I never thought any were a breeze. But if you do find the bosses too challenging, there are accessibility options and difficulty settings to help you out. This is a Kyle Thompson game after all. Vibin', chillin', and having fun should take priority. And that's it for combat. Its simplicity fits well with the game's overall lighthearted tone, providing just enough challenge to keep things interesting without ever feeling overwhelming. To boil it down, it's button mashy with a clear focus on evasion and retaliation. It's straightforward yet satisfying, with tight controls that make each swipe of the broom feel impactful and each jump and dodge feel controlled and intentional. Hey, let's talk about those controls now.
Abilities. Platforming.
So, in this video's introduction, I mentioned how platforming and top-down perspectives don't always play well together. This is largely true, especially for games using an isometric perspective. Thankfully, Crypt Custodian has successfully married platforming and the top-down perspective with two excellent design choices. The first is that little white circle underneath Pluto when he jumps. Not only does that circle tell you exactly where Pluto's going to land, but it also tells you if landing there is a detriment to your health by simply changing from white to red. Seems silly, but it's big. There's zero ambiguity during platforming, and I cannot praise this little circle enough. Another excellent design choice is how forgiving landing on platforms can be. If you land on an edge, Pluto does this kind of Looney Tunes move where he zips back onto solid ground so fast that he leaves a cloud silhouette behind. Again, removing all ambiguity from the equation. Did you touch the platform during landing? Good enough for me. These design choices seem so basic, but basic isn't a dirty word. If you get the fundamentals down, your game is going to control so much better and be way more fun, because most people don't care about gimmicks or advanced avant-garde mechanics if basic movement feels awful. And to that end, Crypt Custodian's movements feel amazing. Jumping and dashing through a hail of bullets or through a tough platforming section was smooth and never felt out of my control. If I got hit by something or fell into the abyss, it was because I sucked. And where did I suck the most? During the timed challenges. That's where. As you explore the Afterlife, you'll be jumping from platforms to elevators to carnival rides and on everything in between, while also dodging a ludicrous amount of enemy fire. Platforming's as essential to the Crypt Custodian experience as combat, and there's no better way to test your platforming chops than in these timed challenges. Much like the no-hit combat arenas, the timed platforming challenges are also pretty lax. Anytime you fall, the game heals that hit so you can get right back up and try again. Remember, vibin', chillin', having fun. That being said, these can still be quite challenging, forcing players to zip all over the place on some precarious settings. But the rewards are worth it. As long as you don't give up, you'll eventually get it. Also, changing the difficulty also adjusts these timed challenges, so you got options. One thing I found particularly challenging were the curses. You find statues that'll curse you until you kill 10 or 15 enemies, and some of these curses are brutal, such as the one-hit kill curse or the spikes will follow you around and try to give you a forced proctology exam curse. The curses can be pretty inventive, though they do start repeating in the late game. You might be asking yourself, why would I want to be cursed? For the reward, obviously. Each time you break a curse, you get an upgrade point which can be used to equip upgrades, which I promise we're getting to shortly. I liked the curses at first, but once they started repeating and I discovered I could just go to an earlier biome to kill weak enemies, I actually started dreading them, but your mileage may vary. As far as abilities are concerned, Pluto has some pretty unique ones. I don't want to spoil them, but I thought they were all really cool and did a great job of gating my progression. The only tried and true ability Pluto gets is the air dash, but come on, you gotta love the air dash. And of all the abilities he gets, it's the only one that's used to enhance platforming. The others are glorified keys, albeit one that can also be used for combat. Most of the other abilities are either going to be used to unlock utility-gated progression or for puzzle solving. Puzzles were pretty cool, kept things fresh, and were varied. They could be something as easy as unlocking a gate by killing enemies with little yellow keys over their heads, to smacking around ghosts and orbs, to drawing something by walking on buttons. And each biome had a gimmick. My favorite being this one biome where dashing around affected enemy behaviors. Look, I know that's vague. I'm trying not to spoil stuff here. Point is, there'll be a lot of weird things and odd puzzles you'll encounter on your journey, and they're pretty fun and mostly easy. And that'll do it for this section. For a top-down game, platforming's done exceptionally well, and Pluto feels great to move around with. Abilities are unique and interesting, though their uses are pretty limited, mainly playing the role as gatekeepers. But as you open up the Afterlife, expect to be greeted with all kinds of fun challenges and puzzles.
Progression.
Progression's Crypt Custodian's weakest aspect, but it's still pretty good. You have your standard Metroid-like characteristics like no leveling, no gear, no skill tree. But what hurts CC the most in this category is there is literally nothing for you to find to increase any of your stats. No weapon upgrades or materials, no different armors or cloaks, I guess, and no way to increase anything in your HUD, not even your HP. You start with 4 hit points, and you die with 4 hit points. Literally. Some of you are probably already thinking, but you can get upgrades to get more health. And you're correct. There's an upgrade that provides 1 extra hit point, and others that increase your damage in certain areas. But I'm talking about collectibles. Crypt Custodian has no heart pieces, no energy tanks, no mask shards, no 3 or 4 of anything that, when put together, increases something. Not having stat increasing collectibles isn't a deal breaker by any means, but it's something I love in MVs. The more crap I can discover, collect, and hoard, the happier I'll be. I presume keeping character improving collectibles scaled down to just upgrades and upgrade points is a design choice that reflects the game's simplistic nature, but this is an area you don't want to skimp out on in an MV, especially one that's 8 to 12 hours in length like Crypt Custodian. Speaking of upgrades and upgrade points, these are things you can collect in the game, if you haven't already gathered. Upgrades are these dodecahedrons you find as you journey across the Afterlife and act just as any modifier in any post Hollow Knight era MV should. You equip them to alter your playstyle or buff stats, and you have limited space to equip them. The amount of upgrades you can equip is determined by your upgrade points. You acquire these in lots of ways. Finding them, completing challenges, breaking curses, or by just straight up buying them. Both upgrades and upgrade points can be purchased at the game's singular shop at the Center's Inn, which is this game's hub. And the currency? Garbage. Garbage just lying around or falling out of defeated enemies. I gotta tell you, one of the most overlooked aspects of an MV is destructible objects. It's just fun to destroy inconsequential things as you're exploring. Makes backtracking a little more exciting. And when destroying stuff rewards you, it's even better. It's just delightful at a primal level. And there's nothing more delightful than slamming down on piles of garbage and listening to the sound of Pluto getting richer. Music to my ears. That's it for progression. Due to the game's minimalistic approach, there's not a whole lot to collect, but what there is to collect is substantial to player expression. Upgrades and upgrade points are your main rewards, and their discovery never gets old. Well, upgrades never get old. You'll be swimming in upgrade points, so they're a little less special, but important nonetheless. You'll most likely have tons of these points by end game. I could almost equip every single upgrade by the end of my playthrough. I ended up with a formidable Pluto, and that's pretty cool. Rarely do you play an MV with modifiers that gives players the capacity to equip every single modifier. I'm not certain if Crypt Custodian lets you equip all of them, but I'd wager it does. If anyone knows if upgrade points have an upper limit, sound off in the comments.
Exploration.
Exploration in Crypt Custodian is very interesting. I'd say it excels in many aspects, but there are some weaknesses, and I'd like to go over those first. I've already talked about the lack of collectibles, so I won't harp on that here, but there are other things to collect that have nothing to do with character progression. I'm talking about the photos. These photos depict various NPCs' lives and how they died. Collecting them doesn't impact anything gameplay-wise, but they're still fun to collect. I'd have to say Crypt Custodian's biggest weakness is how freaking slow Pluto is. There's an upgrade you can get early on that increases his movement speed, but it's just not enough. It may not be an issue for you, but it was for me. Slow moving characters always make backtracking such a chore. Thankfully, and we're moving on to the strengths now, Crypt Custodian has an amazing fast travel system. It's one of those fast travel systems that lets you travel to every save point. Those are my favorite. But even better, you don't have to be at a save point to fast travel. You can literally just open the map and travel wherever you want, whenever you want. This is super convenient because this game's map is humongous. With how slow Pluto moves, you need this convenient fast travel system. The in-game map is pretty detailed and sprawling, so much so that panning across it takes forever. I wish there were a more robust zoom feature to make scanning the map less of a chore. Zooming in would have been so helpful. A mini-map would have been great too. And guess what? Crypt Custodian has a mini-map. Too bad it's turned off by default and I didn't discover it until I beat the game, but that's on me. Oh, also, this game has map markers, so that should be celebrated. Okay, here's the irony. I always complain when a game doesn't have map markers, but when Crypt Custodian comes in with perfectly great map markers, I don't even use them till mid-game. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Had I actually used the map markers from the start, I bet I would have had an easier time figuring out where to go. Oh, a baby. Let's talk about getting stuck. Crypt Custodian's a chunker and a zigzagger. just the way I like my MVs. Chunking and zigzag exploration aren't official terms, they're words I made up to describe an MV's exploration design. When an MV chunks, that means it opens up only a portion of a biome at a time, eventually ability gating players and forcing them to go elsewhere. And zigzagging is a natural consequence of chunking. When you're zigzagging, that means you're ping-ponging all over the map, often revisiting previous biomes in order to discover the path forward. This is something characteristic of the MV genre, but not all MVs do it, nor do they have to. I just prefer it when they do. Anyway, Crypt Custodian does this a lot. And because the world's so big and the game becomes so open at about the halfway mark, and I was so stupid by not using my map markers, I got stuck numerous times and found myself blindly revisiting biomes until I found the path forward. This is a positive comment and the highest of praises for an MV. I can see how this could frustrate non-MV enthusiasts, but this gameplay loop of hitting dead ends, backtracking, getting lost, and then finally discovering the path forward is what the hardest of hardcore MV fans desire. Now, don't let the high likelihood of getting stuck deter you. This is a Kyle Thompson game. We're vibing, chilling, and having fun. If you get stuck, you can pay some garbage and put some objective markers on the map to help you out. Or you can not be stupid and properly use the map markers the game gives you. You got options. And for a game called Crypt Custodian that takes place in the Afterlife, it's pretty dang colorful. Biomes in Crypt Custodian are vibrant, surreal locations filled with all kinds of weirdness in all the right ways. There's a lot of creativity on display, and so many of the sights you'll see are candy for the eyes. That's it for this section. Crypt Custodian offers a vibrant and whimsical experience full of surreal imagery. A variety of impactful collectibles are somewhat lacking for an MV, but what is here is impactful from a gameplay perspective, except for the photos, which are more for lore. Pluto's slow movement can make backtracking feel a little tedious, but the game's excellent fast travel system helps greatly alleviate this issue, so much so that I can understand if someone disagrees with me entirely on this point. The map is detailed, but could benefit from better zooming functionality, and Crypt Custodian's chunking and zigzag exploration design is highly engaging, especially for hardcore Metroidvania fans who enjoy the challenge of navigating a sprawling, interconnected world that they're not afraid to get lost in. Don't be dumb like me and use your map markers.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
Considering this is the third game I've covered by Kyle Thompson this week, I'll be brief. The atmosphere in Crypt Custodian is outstanding, and it all comes down to Kyle's childlike, minimalistic, cartoony character designs, silly humor, surreal environments, and an overall tone of innocence. Sure, Pluto creates a gang to break into the palace, but the reasoning is still so freaking wholesome. Then, combine all that with Eric's ethereal soundtrack, and you got that delicious Thompson Brothers vibe we've all grown to love. The narrative, as is tradition for Kyle, is simple and sweet. The plot doesn't have a whole lot of tension, and wacky characters with goofy dialogue and situations keep you entertained. I loved the idea of collecting friends throughout your journey instead of mystical MacGuffins. And I loved how each biome was a vehicle to simultaneously tell an NPC story and advance the game's overarching plot. It was very entertaining and reinforced the game's themes of innocence and friendship, so it's safe to say that Crypt Custodian's narrative is Kyle's most ambitious story to date. And that's really all I have to say about the atmosphere and narrative. We have another excellent showing by the Thompson brothers. If you're curious, there's only one ending, but as is another Kyle tradition, there's a post-game, and this one's pretty substantial. Though I was able to complete it in an hour or so because I was very thorough during exploration before completing the game. I'm not going to spoil the post-game, but it is very cleverly done, leads to some oddities, and has great lore and rewards.
Final thoughts and score.
Crypt Custodian is another feather in Kyle Thompson's cap. It's an incredible action game with simple combat, challenging bullet hell-esque gameplay, and amazing movement, especially for a top-down platformer. Boss fights are fantastic, exploring its surreal environments is a blast, and there's a degree of polish to the entire package that's highly impressive for a solo dev. Add on its lighthearted tone and forgiving mechanics like healing players after they fail a challenge, and you'll find it very difficult not to be charmed by Pluto's adventure in the Afterlife. I award Crypt Custodian a 9 out of 10.
Tier placement.
This is another one of those cases where having a high score is more indicative of the game's quality than of its Metroidvania-ness. And though Crypt Custodian is an MV through and through, there are some things it lacks in order for it to rank among the truly excellent in the genre. Mainly its character progression and largely unexciting exploration. Crypt Custodian does have decent player expression, and exploring its world has its rewards, especially by simply taking in its environments, but you can only collect so many upgrade points before you lose interest. And the narrative, while perfectly fine, really doesn't do or say a lot, and the characters, though wacky and interesting, also seem to just be there for wackiness' sake. Crypt Custodian finds its final resting place among the B tier. Again, Crypt Custodian is a fantastic video game that I think everyone should play. But if you're trying to scratch that Metroidvania itch, it'll still do that, but just not as well as other titles in the genre. But if you're looking for an excellent action platformer, it's tough to find a game better than Crypt Custodian. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a VIP party to attend.